Hello and welcome from John Cockburn-Evans and myself, Matthew Emerson. We're experienced coaches and consultants in the arena of cultural transformation and change management. We're here today to talk about the next topic in our team leadership series, the importance of how to use positive energy and maintain focus in a change leadership role or change leadership scenario. As before, we're just going to have an informal discussion between ourselves. Hopefully that will provide some insight on the topic and gives you some mild entertainment along the way. We've all experienced significant strain of the unplanned extreme change that we faced over the last 18 months. But just to bring back to sort of more, I guess, planned and manageable times of change, the same types of emotions, distractions and challenges that we've experienced put pressure on collective energy and focus. That can be a significant derailer in effectively delivering change or managing a change program. And John and I have seen this from different angles. So we're trying to explore this topic in a way that can give listeners a better understanding and think about these insights in the context of your own practice or organization, leading to better change outcomes. So, John, today's topic is about how you find appropriate levels of energy and maintain that. Can you kick us off, just enlighten us a bit more on this subject?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Matthew. Yeah, it sort of may sound a bit of a cliche, but your personal energy is related to your performance overall, not just in a sports context, which gets talked about quite a lot, but also in the area of work. This is one of the core principles that myself and my senior associates, as part of the coaching arm of Team Coaching Boutique, really believe in and live and breathe. We all have different energy levels. These can change over time. They're sort of dependent on our situation and our levels of self-awareness. And I'll go into that in a bit more detail as we, continue through the dialogue. To a certain extent, the latter, which is self-awareness, can actually mitigate the first. These levels will vary, but we all have what we call our ARL, our average resonating energy level, which can shift too as well. As I've mentioned a bit earlier as well, this can be dependent on our macro environment and our mindset. The lowest level, which we categorize, from a coaching perspective, is level 1. This is where we can play the victim and have the associate attributes that go with it, such as fear, detachment, apathy, up to the highest possible level, which is categorized by IPEC, the founder of this energy level system, as level 7. Where there is a true sense of being and non-judgment. There is an analogy also here between the famous Maslow pyramid, for those people who are familiar with it, and the hierarchy of needs, where at the top of the pyramid, there is what we call total self-actualization. The intervening levels, bottom upwards, after level 1, which we've talked about, can be generally characterized as conflict, responsibility, concern, reconciliation, and level 6 would be synthesis. With each of these goes a feeling and a core thought and an action. So hopefully that provides a bit of context, Matthew.
It does, definitely. And I think having I always like framework, having some levels, having some, I love structure as well, something that I can look to and try and understand is always helpful. How are these levels then important in determining our state? Like how do the levels play out, I guess, and then how does that impact our consequent performance? Because I as you're talking, I'm reflecting on my own energy levels, if you like, and the impact that has on how I go about day-to-day work. Just talk us through that a little bit then. How does that play out for people?
Well, yes, the real power is the approach. It's the way of thinking that is changeable. Which is, as individuals, that means that we can take charge of our own state and shift it into a more positive state. A lot of the assessments that are personality-based or character-based, of course, gives you a point in time and it defines who you are. The purpose of understanding energy levels is really not just to understand who you are, but where you are at a point in time and understand the fact there are things like self-awareness and influence and environment that can make those changes, I like this approach particularly because with the right coaching and guidance, a person can shift relatively quickly. Personality, as we know, is virtually impossible to shift. And why would we want to do that anyway? I mean, behavioral shift also can take time, as it is often embedded. So the reason I like this particularly is there's huge potential. So if we look at this in a business context, it's also possible to shift the energy of a team. Positive energy is infectious in the right way. When we have more energy, it becomes easier to maintain focus. We know that from a practical perspective, when we have less energy, we become tired and more likely to make mistakes. Even intelligent people can make mistakes. You know, in his seminal book, Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman talks about this in context. He talks about the type 1 brain, which is infinite in capacity and develops through experience and is reactive. The type 2 brain is the more processing and logical side. He and his colleagues ran various experiments in universities such as MIT with students and found that the more physically and mentally stressed people were, i.e. lower energy levels, even with high cognitive ability, they could go and make mistakes.
Yeah, and I think that everybody makes mistakes, as you say. We're all human. Just on the point you made about team energy, an area of interest for me. I have had different experiences where teams are almost reduced to the lowest energy levels within the team. So I guess I look at the team as a whole and think of the component pieces of that. And as you say, in energy, positive energy is infectious. I perhaps assume negative energy to be infectious as well. So just elaborate a little bit on the team dynamics there, because I think in my mind, as you just talked through it, it's clear. I sometimes struggle to connect the dots between the sort of individual level and in this case, individual levels of energy and how that impacts focus and performance, and what it then transpires as, if you like, in more of a team dynamic, as most of us do work in teams. Interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Yes, thank you, Matthew. I'll make a couple of points here. Is that there is a tendency, or can be, or even a perceived tendency, is that when the energy is low of a number of people, we acquiesce to the lowest common denominator, which I think is what you were describing. It's interesting, the IPEC founder, Dr. Bruce Schneider, was talking about this in almost like a 180-degree roundabout way, is that the common thinking, you may have heard the expression, is, if there is one rotten apple in a barrel, it has a tendency to turn all the other apples rotten. But again, it's a question of perspective and to a certain extent resilience. Bruce's sort of thinking on this was, well, okay, what happens if you have a barrel of rotten apples, right, which could, be analogous to low energy, and you put one really good apple in it, but the apple is highly resilient, it stays the test of time. Over time, gradually those rotten apples will turn into sweet apples, right? Okay, that's a perspective rather than more practice. But if you think about that in a team context, what happens when a change agent enters the room? A really strong, resilient change agent, fully aware of the challenges, can go in and start to change a bit of perspective and also change the energy. How many times have you seen it even in a sports context where the sports team might be down and out and there's a change of manager or a lead player, they bring them in and all of a sudden the coincident energy improves dramatically. I was also on a webinar quite recently with a guy called Professor Peter Hawkins from the Henley Business School. And he was talking about taking the heat out of dull meetings, and exactly that. He was talking about how, as a coach or a change leader, you can shift energy levels in meetings when things get particularly dull. Let's face it, we've all been to very dull meetings, and it's all about turning a negative into a positive. When this happens, we can have a huge collective sigh of release. And then when that collective sigh of relief happens, there's an energy increase. The team becomes more purposeful and more focused. And again, I guess the second main thread to this is Patrick Lencioni talks about in his famous book, The 5 Dysfunctions of Team. Those are inattention, results, avoidance of accountability and lack of commitment, and fear of conflict, and absence of trust in his famous pyramid, right? All of these are negative attributes. Just think what would happen if we managed to inject some positive energy into those attributes and how we could turn that and turn, team performance, improve the trust, improve the commitments, improve the focus on results. I hope that makes sense, Matthew.
Yeah, it does. I think, and as you're describing it, I'm kind of thinking through different scenarios of practically. I wonder if you could perhaps give a an example, not necessarily of anything too sensitive, but thinking of different scenarios where, as you describe it, you've potentially, I don't know, would describe it on sort of low on positive energy, high on negative energy, or just at a point where, as we've described, that sort of the focus and the ability to positively move forward is somehow stifled, and the sort of injection of, as you call it, a change agent, that I guess it can be down to an individual to sort of shift the atmosphere almost, but to a point where it has some kind of effect on the other participants. Again, I could think of some scenarios in which that can happen. I wonder if you could just paint a vivid picture for us as to what type of scenario that might be.
Well, yes, in a business context, it could be that a team is not getting the results it wants. It's focusing on the past, it's focusing on the history because they've had a particularly tough time. They all collectively know that actually they need to improve, but they don't know how to go and do it. And because the results have been bad, the consequent energy has been low. Somebody else comes into the team, maybe shares a positive story about a previous experience where they turned things around, for instance, where they started off with a bad result and actually they've improved the results. And that's, as we know, from a change leadership point of view, storytelling can be quite powerful. And give a tangible example. Well, when I was at Company X, we faced a similar problem, but what we did was this. We took it with bite-sized chunks. We built on some small successes, we built success, and then we can, change the overall performance of the team, and then starting asking maybe coaching questions around, what do we think we can do as a team to actually go and change that? And then just open people's minds from a sort of inward transactional focus onto a more open, well, what can we do about it? And there's plenty of examples like that. We've seen in business, plenty of times where products may have had a problem or there's been an issue with marketing or something like that. And somebody's been brought in specifically to try and turn that team into a more positive place. And, energy is one thing. I don't think I've ever seen somebody come in as a change leader with a monotone voice and a lack of energy and turn a team, right? That, of course, takes some level of personal risk from the change agent, but that's what it's about. That's why those people are change leaders. And the personal risk for them is that they know there's a risk it might not improve, but they're prepared to take the chance of putting themselves out there and making a difference. I see positive energy a bit like the oil in the gearbox, right? If you don't have oil in the gearbox, the gears won't mesh, and the gears of the team. Does that make sense, Matthew? Have I answered your question?
You have, yeah, brilliant. Really clear for me, actually. And I think the couple of things we've spoken separately around the sort of role of a change agent. I think that can be an existing member of a team or come from sort of within. As you've said, it could be the introduction of somebody new within the team, or it could be an entirely sort of external objective leader in that capacity. But I think the way you were describing it, you've got that necessity for some level of experience, expertise, and credibility to be able to break the cycle effectively. As the way you were describing it is that, rather than keep going around the same lap of low energy and not getting anywhere, actually having somebody who can find a way of taking that group on a slightly different journey, and, as you say, sort of injecting energy along the way. So just moving us on from that then, if we kind of got that clear picture painted, what then are the drivers, or how do you ensure focus and energy to that end? Because I think in some ways there's almost like a tactical element to this, but it'd be interesting to hear what your thoughts on the kind of core, and I think you started to refer to this earlier, but the core drivers of this.
Yeah, good point. I guess this is where we talk about enablers. And the way I see this is self-awareness is a key factor in keeping the personal energy high. Self-awareness and the ability to reflect specifically allows you to stay positive and keep your energy up. We all know that periods of reflection are really, really important. Quite often we don't do it, particularly when we're under pressure or stress. It allows you to understand that you have greater impact on the working environment, probably more so than you imagine. Focus is almost a corollary, obviously, or of the preceding factor. If you have that level of self-awareness, you're more likely to be focused because you've got the period of reflection, you know. And, you know, this is, I find, particularly powerful. When we're in reflective mode, it gives us the opportunity to also declutter our brains, which by definition, of course, allows us to focus. We know that clutter in our brains can hamper our focus. There's also another important factor related to self-awareness. Sometimes people get stuck in the tramlines, you know, of it all being about you, i.e. them, okay? And of course, it's not all about focusing on yourself. Self-awareness is about, you know, what impact are you having on the team around you, and understanding what that impact really is. You know, people who have strong self-awareness will generally forge stronger business relationships, in my experience. They're less likely to judge, get hijacked by their own egos, for instance. You know, and certainly after my coach training, I was able to understand the depth and importance of this factor and forged more and stronger business relationships over time. Okay.
Yeah, I think we just lost you at the end there, John. Are you still with us?
I am indeed, yes.
Okay, perfect. No, sorry, I think we've got you. Yeah, and I think, I guess in my experience, the hinge of self-awareness is important. As you say, I think perhaps sometimes misinterpreted as the start and the end, whereas what you've just described is then the extension of self-awareness, which isn't that self-awareness in itself is the solution, but is effectively that precursor to understanding your role and influence within team or within the wider kind of operating environment. And as you said, kind of relationships are quite complex and extend in different directions. So I think that's it's useful to understand. And I guess we'd be expecting people who are investing in developing better individual collective energy to be thinking along those lines, rather than there is a simple solution, if you like, and it's called self-awareness. I think it kind of goes on from there. So one of the challenges I have, particularly around the topic of self-awareness actually, but then broader on energy, I think some people think of this thing of energy as being clearly not something you can necessarily put your hands on, and it's all well and good talking about it. So if I start to invest in this way, or think and apply myself in this way, what's going to go wrong? I guess there's potential fear of, if I'm doing this, I'm not doing something else, or if I do this and do it badly, I'm going to have some kind of negative impact. So what would be the impact of being the change leader who tries to steer themselves and their team along these lines, and it's not working? What's going wrong?
Well, yeah, so, a very moving point. Certainly from my perspective, I don't think there really are any negative consequences. And I don't mean to try and sound sort of fluffy or trite, but improved energy and focus can only be a good thing. However, there are some caveats. The energy needs to be channeled rather than randomized. We've all seen the overly ebullient characters who tend to take over and have a negative impact on others. In a business context, this could mean an energetic individual becomes overly directive, takes over, leads a team down a singular path with negative consequences potentially. This is where there is a fine line. The good news is that increased levels of self-awareness should actually stop this happening, if that makes sense, Matthew.
Yeah, I think it's that parallel existence, isn't it, of not letting energy become a sort of superficial tool to kind of get your own way, and like you say, sort of almost just turning into being overly assertive rather than channeled, I think is the word you used, more specifically with the best interests of the team and the business, I think in practical terms. Yeah, and I guess the point I was thinking through about the negative consequences, the resource we all struggle for sometimes is time, and whether the amount of time, as you referred earlier, to sort of reflect, I guess, is worth the investment. But as you've painted that picture, I think we're all becoming better at accepting the need for ourselves to be high performing, and for the impact we have on others, that we do have to make some investment, whatever that looks like for us personally. We have to think about how that's going to happen, rather than just the random attempt at trying to move things forward. So positive energy based on self-awareness and an amount of reflection and understanding about how that positively contributes, if you like, to team effort, all powerful and all directionally sort of with the right intentions geared up for business performance. Are there other factors around that? I guess I've said this a few times in previous conversations. We can't overly simplify some of this because it's not always clear cut. But so are there other things that directly sit around this, if you like, that you would say come hand in hand with it?
Yeah, and you're right. There aren't any hard borders or boundaries here. So if we swing back to where I started with the 7 levels of energy, levels 3 to 7 are known as what we call the anabolic, i.e. constructive energy levels. They're the ones that help us and build us. Levels 1 and 2 are known as the catabolic energy. And over time, this can destroy us. Sometimes that's called, the fight, flight, or the fright. And to a certain extent, where the type 1 brain gets triggered, as Daniel Kahneman talks about it. The catabolic energy levels can serve as in emergency situations. That's what it's there to do. But we can't stay there for too long. To me, this is again where the self-awareness, and again, I can't overemphasize this, this is something I've got from, significant experience, is really important, because if you are self-aware, and even if you understand these 7 levels of energy, you know how to respond in certain situations. You know if you're being personally hijacked. You also are less likely to be judgmental because you'll probably recognize when somebody else is personally hijacked and give them some space. And that all helps relationship building and energy, which is really important in a business situation. How many times have we been in a business context where somebody may have said something out of context or inappropriate, and we've rushed to judge them rather than cutting them a bit of slack and saying, well, maybe there's something driving that. Maybe it's their energy, maybe it's the environment, maybe it's their current situation, or even, and quite particularly recently, is it something that's home that's causing a problem that's not business related? I think the more self-aware we are, the more likely we are to, provide a bit of headroom and headspace, which is really, really important, when we're moving forward in terms of performance. Because by definition, we've picked a good team, right? We've got the best talent there and we want to give them the opportunity to use. Sometimes we call that, providing psychological safety, and there's plenty of papers on that. Does that make sense, Matthew?
Yeah, and I think what that adds something on my mind, you mentioned earlier about the risk, right? So at a personal level, if you are embarking as a change leader in any capacity, really, there's an element of risk. But the things you've outlined in terms of particularly the self-awareness, but then the sort of utilization of energy and the things that leads to and how you manage that, it's managed risk. I guess at the end of the day, that kind of seems to be something we come back to a lot of the time, which is sometimes leading self and others through challenging circumstances is fraught with risk. Identifying what those risks are, and then in the way you've described, being able to really manage that to good effect, sounds like a thread through this as well.
No, absolutely. I think you've nailed it there. It's a good summation of what we've really talked about today, Matthew.
Brilliant. Thanks, John. Thanks for talking through with me today. Definitely insightful to get your thoughts and on the topics of energy and focus, and some of your experiences. I certainly learn a lot from that. So thank you to you. Thank you to those who've listened. We hope this has provoked some further thought about how others go about their own engagements, whether that be in a consulting coaching capacity or leading through transformation and change. Please, for anybody listening, do have a look at the papers we've written on some of these topics, as well as the other podcasts in this series. And we hope you'll also listen to our future episodes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthew.